But we are afflicted in every way, but not crushed, perplexed, but not despairing, persecuted, but not forsaken, struck down, but not destroyed. Always carrying about in the body the dying of Jesus, that the life of Jesus also may be manifested in our body. For we who live are constantly being delivered over to death for Jesus' sake, that the life of Jesus also may be manifested in our mortal flesh. So death works in us, but life in you. That last verse there is 2 Corinthians chapter 4, ending with from verse 8 down to 12. So death works in us, but life in you. This is not unique to Paul or to the Christian ministry, although it is best exemplified in the Christian ministry. But let me explain what I mean by it's not unique. Death works in one person so that life works in another. I mean, this is a constant theme of life. For example, everything we eat has to die for us to eat it. Well, we don't say plants exactly die, but they are plucked from their place and they are changed into a service for the person who eats it. Animals, they die. You have your cows, for example, or sheep, or even pigs and things like that, birds. They die for us. So death works in them, but life is in us. There's also, you think about a parent who works hard to the point of exhaustion, to the point of debilitating their own bodies. You know, they get worn out, they have aches and pains, and they pick up various illnesses and conditions based upon their work for their children. They want their children to have a better life, so they work hard for that. So death is at work in them, so that life, that is this earthly life, the benefits of it, may work in their children. So we see that this is not an uncommon thing. It's just that the effect of the work of the Christian minister, any ministry at all, any service done in the name of the Lord, redounds not only to temporal benefits like the parent, sacrificing for the child, or even the animal giving up its life for the meals of the human or other animals, but the effect is eternal. And that's why, and it's really only by the grace of God that Paul said that he did the things he did. I mean, they were constantly, if you read his life in the book of Acts and his references in 2 Corinthians 11, for example, when he talks about the various difficulties that he's been in. He was put in prison in Philippi, and stoned at Lystra, and left for dead, whipped, accused, chased, suffering so many things. But what he says here is that he said, I don't compare the sufferings of this world to be compared to the glories to be revealed. He said it's a light matter between the two. So death works in one, that life works in another. And we feel bad that sometimes that is the case with some people. It's almost as if they were meant to be sacrificial, that they had to give up a lot so that other people could be benefited. But that is their station in life, and that is the very thing that they are meant to be. it should evoke sympathy and pity from us that that's the case, but also the sense that God knows, God uses sacrifice to bring about life. I mean, look at his own son. His own son was sent to do what? We're told in Mark 10:45, for example, that he did not come to be served, to be benefited, that is, but rather to serve and to give his life a ransom for many. So he had two parts to his mission here. The service of the people, the circumcision, the people of Israel, right? He taught them, he prophesied to them, he fed them, he healed them, he delivered them. And he walked all around with his disciples, doing this work. So much so that at times we read that they couldn't stop to eat lunch. So busy were the needs and the people pressing in on him for various ills and concerns and troubles. And they were, like the Lord said, a sheep without a shepherd. And he had compassion on them, right? So he suffered here. He was a man acquainted with suffering and grief, so that death worked in him, so that life could work in us. And that's really the biggest display of this is through his death. Because without his death, we don't have life. Because we're told in Hebrews, for example, without the shedding of blood, there is no remission of sin. And Jesus himself, being sinless, was not deserving of death, so that his death when he died wasn't for himself, but rather for others. If it was for himself, which it wasn't, but if it was for himself, hypothetically speaking, he'd still be in the ground, like everybody else. In other words, if he had died for his own sin, but he was sinless and innocent. A statement that is underlined quite a bit in the New Testament, that he was sinless. And even in the Old Testament, in Isaiah 53, for example. So it is a fact of life that some people are in a sacrificial state in order that the others could have life from it. And it extends throughout all of there's a spectrum of death we're talking about here, from the sacrifices of a parent who does without, that's a form of death, they're doing without something, so that their children could have that. Or someone who works for a servant to a master, he might, spend himself for his benefit. So really, we're really simply, when people do that, they are operating in an imitation, so to speak, of Jesus. And often Christians do have to do without because of the world. For one thing, the one big thing that they do without is their sins. Because we're told in Galatians 5 that, in Galatians 5 it says, for the flesh wars against the spirit, and the spirit against the flesh. For they are contrary one to the other, so that you cannot do the things you'd like to do. So there is a death there, isn't there? We give up and abandon our evil ways and our passions and evil desires and fleshly indulgences to serve the Lord. It's called a living sacrifice in Romans 12. To present our bodies as a living sacrifice. So the word sacrifice means death. The carrying of a cross means death, to do without something in order that life can work in someone else. And without this going on, we don't have, without this going on, we wouldn't have life in people if people only thought about themselves. Because then they want life for themselves, but life for no one else than themselves. So 2 Corinthians 4:12. So death works in us, but life in you. And that could be true for us each individually. And we are receivers of someone else's death. And we ourselves can be expended for someone else's life. Amen.